you mentioned container operating system. Our CRO, Michael, coined the term container lifecycle management is what he calls it. And so now it's kind of he says like we invented our own new category, and now it's kind of caught on, and we have really doubled down on that. And we think that, visibility is important and getting the data around where your shipments are. But what's even more important is the execution piece beyond that, right? So visibility helps you understand what's happening, and execution helps you actually do something about that.
Welcome into another episode of Everything is Logistics, a podcast for the thinkers in freight. We are proudly presented by SPI Logistics, and I am your host, Blythe Brumleve. Today, we've got a great discussion to have. It's all centered around visibility, which I think is the buzzword that you hear at every conference. But we are going to be talking about, and I think you guys coined this, the container operating system within global trade. We are talking to Gnosis Freight CTO Jake Hoffman. So Jake, I know we've been trying to make this happen for a while, so glad to finally have you.
Yeah, Blythe, happy to be here. And everything you said is totally correct, and can't wait to dive more into it.
Awesome. Well, first, before we get into like the serious side of things, you are based in Charleston, South Carolina. I have a very guilty pleasure of watching the show Southern Charm, and I have to know, do you watch the show? Do you see any of these folks around town being a hot mess?
Yeah. So my wife Aubrey is a huge Bravo person, and she watches the Real Housewives and all these. And so Southern Charm is one of the ones that I do watch because they go to the same restaurants and the bars and all this stuff that we do. And so I watch that with her, and then Charleston's so small where if you go to King Street, like right downtown, then you go to any of those restaurants or anything, it's pretty likely at some point that you run into some of the people from the show. It's pretty funny.
Are they as of a mess on a regular basis as they are on the show?
Maybe. I don't see them being too much of a mess. I think they've matured and they have their public persona done pretty well. They're all super nice though. So I think cool. I've met them all, and they're all great to meet and super nice in person, which is very refreshing.
Okay, last Southern Charm question, because I'm sure people listening are probably going to be annoyed, but who's your favorite character on the show? I have a lot of respect for Craig. I think Craig is super nice. I've met him in person in Charleston a few times. He's super nice. And he's on a couple of the other shows that my wife watches and all those things. But he's like I said, all of them are nice, but Craig is the most, like, anytime I've met him in person, he's friends with some of my mutual friends in Charleston and everything. He's never stuck up or arrogant or anything about it. Ever whatsoever. That's super cool, and that's cool to hear too, because he's definitely had the most come up story for folks who, I'm not going to explain the history actually.
We can talk about this forever. Yeah.
Let's move on to the topic that people probably clicked play on this episode for. And I hear this phrase. I've given I've moderated a couple panels around visibility, and I hear the phrase thrown around a lot. But can you define visibility for us in the freight world?
Sure. Yeah. So I think Gnosis as a whole, you can lump us into the category of visibility, and visibility means a whole lot of different things to a lot of different people. For us, we focus on international. We focus on the international journey of a container. So from the time a container is loaded at a factory, either overseas or here, if it's an export going somewhere else, to the time that container is empty returned. And so visibility can be the milestones of it gets loaded, it gets, truck takes it to a port or a terminal, it gets loaded on a vessel, and then it's in the middle of the ocean. So the visibility would just be hey, I want to know the milestones when they happen, and then what's my ETA for when it's going to get to its destination. And so that's, visibility as a whole. We drill a little bit further down into that you mentioned container operating system. Our CRO, Michael, coined the term container lifecycle management is what he calls it. And so now it's kind of he says like we invented our own new category, and now it's kind of caught on, and we have really doubled down on that. And we think that, visibility is important and getting the data around where your shipments are. But what's even more important is the execution piece beyond that, right? So visibility helps you understand what's happening, and execution helps you actually do something about that.
That is a perfect soundbite. I'm just going to go ahead and thank the post-production process for later on, because that is going to be the intro clip that we use for this episode. It's always bothered me, or maybe not bothered me is the right phrase, but curiosity. When I check in Amazon and I can see the truck that's delivering my product is 6 blocks away, and there are 4 stops from me, and I can see that level of visibility down to the granular level of when a package is going to be dropped off at my porch. However, that doesn't seem to really exist, or maybe I'm wrong, that doesn't seem to really exist in container shipping. Is that accurate?
It is accurate, and that's accurate to say, and it's the reason it doesn't is because it's so difficult to achieve that. And the reason it's so difficult is because you think like Amazon for the most part, or the USPS or UPS or FedEx or someone, all those companies are so big, and the parcel network of you getting a package delivered to your house is those things are so small that they can control the entire infrastructure from end to end. So like FedEx has an actual truck that's theirs that's coming to your house and making a delivery, right? And so if they have the plane that has the FedEx logo on the side and they have the truck, then they have all their own assets and their own infrastructure to handle all this. But when you get into international freight, you see the giant ships that are in the ocean and in the harbor. You see all the trucks that are in and out of ports and picking up containers and doing all these things. The infrastructure that's required to do that is so large that there's no way for one company to do it all. So, I mean, freight forwarders are like the best example of someone who attempts to do this, and they do it through contracting all the different players. They contract the ocean carrier, they contract a drayage, the truck that picks up a container, and then they even contract warehouses and do those things. But there's still all these actual individual asset owners that all have to work together to make it come to fruition. So the only way to get that end-to-end visibility, that, you know, your Amazon experience for international freight, is to tap into all of those individual sources and get the data from all those different places and put it in one kind of seamless data model that you can show to the end customer.
Which it sounds like it, I mean, in theory, it sounds like it should be just as simple as taking a little Apple AirTag or something very similar and just throwing it into a container. Why isn't it that easy? And then sharing that data with all parties involved.
Right. And that's, some people are getting better and better at it. You know, that some of the ocean carriers have announced that they're going to, like Hapag-Lloyd announced they're equipping every single container with IoT devices. I know that CMA has some, Maersk has some that they do for reefer specifically, and their plan is to roll it out to all containers. But even if you get to where each container has like a GPS tag on it or something, we can kind of get there now, at least when it's on the water and when it's in the terminal and things, through like AIS satellite data telling you where the vessel is in the ocean. You know, you open up maps and you can see where it is on a map. But even if you do all that, there's still these little operational quirks that happen where even if you know exactly where it is, you don't know what's about to happen or what the status is of things. Perfect example is, I know it's in the terminal, but I don't know if it's actually available for pickup, because I don't know if it's stacked at the ground and there's 3 containers on top of it, or if it's at the top and I can just get a crane to pull it off and put it on top of a truck. Or if maybe the container's there, but according to US Customs, my paperwork was messed up, so there's a hold and I'm not allowed to go pick it up. So there's all these other data sources that go into it. That's not just about where it is, but about all these other statuses that really matter, that help inform what you can do, and then subsequently when it's going to get to the place that it needs to go.
So is this almost an issue at the port level where they just have so many different moving parts, per se, literally and figuratively? Is it because they have all of these moving pieces and all these individual players that everybody kind of acts as if they're in their own silo?
Yeah, that's a part of it. And it's, everybody has their own part to play. And so the real ideal answer is there's some third party that is the source of truth, quote unquote, that takes data from all these places and makes it. Because, the terminal themselves, where the container is going to be dropped off by a ship, relies on the ocean carrier to tell them when the vessel is going to get there. But then once it gets close, the ocean carrier who's leasing the vessel or owns the vessel relies on the terminal to tell them when the vessel actually docked and when the container got pulled off. And then they also rely on US Customs to tell them, hey, are we allowed to give the container out? Because there's all these different people that are required to give their different inputs at somewhere along the chain to where it all flows seamlessly. And that's why there's that weird kind of black box of what's the source of truth, because there isn't really one person that is a source of truth. There's all these different people that are interacting at different points in the journey.
So how did you, and I believe you're one of the co-founders, is that right?
I think my title's not technically co-founder. I was like the first employee. So
that's from what I understand. I heard, that the business sort of started out with, Post-it notes, or maybe you can explain to us, how did the business start out? Because I would imagine that you're looking at all of these different data points and it's like, what the heck? How do you choose to, start a business that centers around those different data points?
So you heard the Post-it note story. That's funny. So Austin, our CEO, he originally started Gnosis as consulting. We were working here in Charleston with a freight forwarder, and the idea was basically to take his knowledge of supply chain and data science. He studied at Auburn University, just like I did, and to take his knowledge of supply chain and data science to come in and help the freight forwarder automate processes. And it was literally the first product we built was, hey, email is coming into an inbox, and we're going to read the email with code, and we're going to say, hey, this looks like it belongs to this account, so we're going to send it to this account manager, and then they're going to take that invoice and pay it, or they're going to look at the invoice and see, or we're going to take this and send the invoice to accounting. There's all these kind of things that we were doing, because all they were doing at the current point was they had an employee that was looking at the emails and being like, oh, this is so-and-so's responsibility, and forwarding it off to them. So it really started as that. And the Post-it note story is the first time I came to Charleston. I was about to move to Chicago and go work in Chicago trading options. So I was going to be a quant trader, and Austin convinced me to come hang out with him in Charleston. And I went in, and he had like a fold up table, like one that you buy at Walmart, and just sticky notes all over the wall of like, this is how, customs gets cleared. This is the different places that where a container changes hands and all that kind of stuff. And it was just like trying to map out this entire global supply chain process. And for whatever reason, I was like, oh, this looks awesome. I definitely want to be a part of that. And then the rest is kind of history from there.
And so you guys, when was that timeline? How far along or how many years ago did all of this start?
Austin started the company in 2017. And I came and worked with him for an internship while I was in grad school. It was just me and him at the time in 2018.
Are you in freight sales with a book of business looking for a new home? Or perhaps you're a freight agent in need of a better partnership? These are the kinds of conversations we're exploring in our podcast interview series called The Freight Agent Trenches, sponsored by SPI Logistics. Now, I can tell you all day that SPI is one of the most successful logistics firms in North America who helps their agents with back office operations such as admin, finance, IT, and sales, but I would much rather you hear it directly from SPI's freight agents themselves. And what better way to do that than by listening to the experienced freight agents tell their stories behind the how and the why they joined SPI. Hit the freight agent link in our show notes to listen to these conversations, or if you're ready to make the jump, visit spi3pl.com.
And so how's the company evolved since then? Because obviously we've had, a lot of things happen since 2017, just
Right.
a few black swan events, no big deal. How did the company evolve through all of those different, I guess, black swan data points as well?
It's a lot. I try to explain to some people, it's like a lot of cases of imposter syndrome over and over. And like imposter syndrome, like assuming that someone out there knows better than you. Like if this could be done, somebody would have done it. So it was a lot of, oh, well, we just want to build software that helps this one niche because someone definitely has good data, container tracking data out there that we can just buy or source and do it. And so it was like, we solved this problem. The customer's asking us for more. We try to find somebody that does it. If there's not somebody in the market that does it, we're like, okay, well, we can try to do it ourselves. And a whole lot of iterations of doing that over and over, even to the just tracking data itself. We had tried to source tracking data, like the actual ocean carrier milestones of like when it gets loaded on a vessel and those things, from the ocean carriers through EDI messages. And then that wasn't good enough. So we went to a couple of different data providers in the space and tried those people out. And then it was always like, if the data is not good, our software doesn't work, because our software was so dependent on, we need to know exactly when a container discharges and is available for a truck to pick it up, or what the ETAs are going to be to a really granular level, to where I think this was like early 2020. I told Austin, hey, I think we need to do this ourselves. I think it's important enough to the software that we have our own container tracking data and we're in control of it. So we did it, iterated on it a whole bunch. We get feedback still to this day, every single day, about, hey, we really think, one of our customers, hey, I know that you guys are doing this and this, but it'd be really cool if you could add this data point because it's useful for this thing. And so our container data model is always changing. And if we were relying on other people for that, we wouldn't be able to make those changes and continuously improve.
What types of, or I guess what modes or data points have been the most challenging to integrate or even start collecting?
I think the most difficult part for any of the sources, so we'll say like ocean carriers, terminals, the class 1 rail carriers themselves. So like the BNSF, Norfolk Southern, CSX, the people, and I'm just talking about North America for rail, of course, but the satellite data. The most difficult piece is understanding that each of them all has their own data model, their own what they call milestones. So like what the rail carrier calls a loaded on rail date or a discharge or whatever may not be what the ocean carrier is calling, because maybe the rail carrier is discharging it here and then putting it back on the rail and going to a different spot. And so the hardest thing is between getting the data from all the different places, putting it into one giant data model that makes sense for what our customers care about. And that's where we have really put a whole lot of effort into, because that's what our customers pay us for. That's what they want, is to get really, really good data, but also to get it in a way that they can use it.
And so when you're collecting this data, I'm curious, how do you know if it's good data or, just the data sucks?
I mean, there's a whole lot of validation that goes into it. There's a whole lot of redundancy. And so people ask us about that. And, one of the things that we do is you can get some redundancy from some of the sources. In the example I just gave on a rail carrier giving a milestone, or when a container is getting unloaded from a vessel at a terminal, you can get that data point from the terminal, or you can get it from the ocean carrier. And most of the time, what's happening behind the scenes is the terminal is sending that data point to the ocean carrier, and then the ocean carrier is sending it to us, for example, right? And so if we get it directly from the terminal, then that kind of eliminates the middleman, eliminates the 3 or 4 hours of latency that you have to wait for the data point to get back and forth. And so there is an element of, we try to get it from multiple sources and do some verification. And then we have a whole bunch of the super buzzwordy machine learning, AI, whatever you want to call it, that looks for the things that could be wrong, looks for the anomalies and flags it and tells us that there's something wrong there, and then fixes it hopefully on its own.
And so how do you, with say, a typical customer, what does the onboarding experience look like for them? What are they looking at within the Gnosis platform that makes them be able to take action?
So this is something we really pride ourselves on. And, you hear this, there's all these memes about, oh, I have a database management system, or I manage my supply chain, and then it's really just Excel. Like, it's like people are just using Excel and emailing Excel.
Looking at you, F1.
People are just using Excel sheets and emailing them back and forth, right? And so we, instead of being like, oh, Excel is dead, like that's dumb for people to do that, we kind of try to make our platform look like Excel. On every single demo that Michael does, our CRO, Michael Rentz, every single demo he does, he says, if you know how to use Excel, you know how to use Gnosis. And it's because we made the tables look like Excel. They're literally condition formatted of, it's red if your container is in danger of getting demurrage. It's yellow if it's going to be a couple of days away. So you got to kind of watch it. And so there's all these things that we've done to kind of mirror how we were talking to people that were running their supply chains, so that there wouldn't be this huge change management, right? It's like, oh, I was doing this stuff in Excel and I had this cool pivot table that I use every day, and now I got to go into this weird system and click a bunch of different buttons and do it. So that's the one piece of it, is to kind of mirror what they're already doing. And the second is to take the data from where they're at, and then we have engineers. Every single person that's a customer of ours, every single account that is a customer of ours, has an engineer at Gnosis that is their account manager that writes code that takes they're like, hey, we get this report every day from the ocean carrier that tells us what shipments have been booked. And so we write the code to take that report and turn it into Gnosis. Like, we write code that takes the container number and the bill of lading number, or whatever it is, and puts it in their platform for them, instead of going through the 6 weeks of an EDI implementation, or figuring out whenever their IT resources are going to be ready 6 months from now to do a full-on API integration with SAP or whatever it's going to be. We want to do it as easily and quickly as possible, and make it look like what they're doing to foster that adoption, so that they don't have to wait for all these things to happen, so that they can get the value out of what we're doing.
And so as you maybe before someone becomes a customer, if they're used to sort of, if it's not, if it ain't broke, don't fix it type mindset, how do you as a shipper, as a customer, know that you're working inefficiently, that your data is probably inaccurate, or it has some latency issues? How do you know, and what are maybe you kind of struggling with before you reach out to say, sort of become a customer of Gnosis?
I think a common theme that we see is if people are spending all their time looking for the problems instead of solving them, that's the first red flag. We have so many of our customers that their job before Gnosis was, hey, I got to figure out what might be costing us money. Like, we had demurrage or per diem detention, whatever you want to call it, last year because containers got stuck at the port, and they have these Excel spreadsheets where they're sorting by the last free day and understanding and doing all these things. If people are spending their time doing that instead of acting on it, like sending a trucker to go pick it up or telling the warehouse, hey, this last free day is tomorrow, we need to get this unloaded and sent back ASAP. If that's what they're spending time on, is understanding where that is, that's the red flag. That's where we come in, is instead, because we think there's things that computers are good at solving and things that humans are good at doing. We're not trying to replace employees. Our marketing pitch is never, hey, you had 10 people doing this, now you have 5, you save money. It's take the people that were previously looking for all these things, let Gnosis find it, and then let them act on it. Let them be hey, according to Gnosis, we got to do this and this, call somebody, send an email, do whatever it is to act on it, and then make their supply chain run better.
So how, I guess, from Gnosis's perspective, how are you creating that single source of truth with all of these different moving parts within the silos of the supply chain, but then also all of these different tech stacks that all of these companies are using? How does that work? How does that function?
We've done our engineers are super smart. Like I'll say but really I'm the dumbest engineer. I just know how to talk to the guys, and they're super smart, and they tell me how to do things, right? I'm like, hey, I think we should do this. Is this possible? But we've done a really good job, I think, of meeting everybody where they're at. I'm talking to you about, we meet the customer where they're at, which is working in an Excel spreadsheet, and we try to mimic that. But if a terminal, I had terminal examples off the top of my head, if they have an API, awesome. It's like, hey, we know how to work with an API. We can make that work. If they can send us an Excel file once every couple hours with a CSV that comes through a FTP transfer or something, no problem, right? We've seen everything from sending us an email report every hour, SFTP, EDI, API, even to at the far end of the spectrum is there's someone that is typing a message and it's text. We're like, okay, just send that to us. And then we use AI to parse it and get the data out of it and then put it in the database. So if someone sends an email and says, hey, the last free day is tomorrow, April 18th or April 19th, I guess, then we will take that out and put the last free day is April 19th in the platform so that somebody can see that that's what's happening.
Brokering success demands a battle-ready strategy. TIE TMS equips freight brokers with the ultimate battle station for conquering a tough market. With TIE, brokers gain access to a comprehensive platform where rate intelligence and quote history converge on a single screen. It's not just a page, it's a strategic command center designed to help brokers win. TIE equips your team with all of the data they need to negotiate with confidence and allows them to communicate directly with carriers and customers from a simple control base. Revolutionize the way your brokers perform by giving them a competitive advantage with TIE TMS. For more info, go to tai-software.com/battle stations, and we also have a link for you in the show notes to sign up for a demo. Now, I've heard you mention, demurrage and detention a few times, maybe for folks who aren't completely familiar with those phrases. What are they? Why are they a problem? And do you think that they'll ever be fully eradicated from, I guess, a visibility standpoint?
So demurrage being the time that a container is available for pickup, has been unloaded from so if there's a part where it gets on a train and there's a rail lag at the end, and in that case, demurrage will start when it's at the rail yard after it gets off the train and it's ready to be picked up. If at a rail yard, sometimes they have 24 hours, 48 hours. It's a shorter time slot where if they don't send a truck to go pick up that container, they're going to start getting charged basically for storage, for the real estate, right? And so in that case, if they don't go pick it up at a certain time, then they start getting charged. Sometimes it's $300 a day. Sometimes it's $50 a day, whatever it is. And if they don't go pick that container up, they're getting charged for leaving their container there. On the opposite end, I said detention, some people call it per diem. That's when you take the container away. So a truck picks it up and brings it out. and then you keep it out for too long. And that's the ocean carrier in that instance charging you for keeping their equipment out. Because if you keep it out for 30 days, that's 30 days that they could have been using it to ship something from, they could fill it full of something else and somebody else paying money to ship that container somewhere else in the world.
So it's almost like container leasing.
Yeah.
That it sounds like a whole like separate business or probably a revenue line item, which is probably different incentives for maybe some of these companies.
Exactly. And you asked the question about, will it ever be eradicated? And there's times when it's worse, then there's times when it's better. I think right now we've seen across our book of business and talking to people and everything, the problem still exists, but it's not near the levels of money and time and things that it was in the middle of the pandemic. So whenever it was really hard to get trucks to go pick things up and you had no room in the warehouses because you're just picking containers up, unloading them, and trying to ship out goods all the time, the ports were used as storage almost strategically to a certain point. So instead of going to pick up a container and bring it to your warehouse, you didn't have anywhere to put it. So you would leave it and be like, what, $300 a day? That's fine, because we can afford that for now because we're selling everything in our warehouse and we're going to wait till we have room to put it somewhere. And then, so that's, I don't think it'll ever be fully eradicated. The penalties, while sometimes they seem crazy, I think they're there for a reason to kind of keep things going and incentivize the movements of things in the supply chain.
But I think for if I'm understanding correctly, the main plight for a lot of the Gnosis customers is that they want to avoid some of those unnecessary fees, and your software can help them on a daily basis to sort of find those anomalies, or I think you called it like, exception management, find those different moments so you can avoid those extra penalties. Is that accurate?
That's right. And sometimes it's not avoiding them. Sometimes it's optimizing them. And I'll use the same example of like where, we have 5 containers at the port and I only have room to pick up 3. And maybe it's like, I know the way that my supply chain works, I'm going to use the time at the port as storage. Hopefully this is nobody's supply chain strategy is to incur demurrage all the time. But in cases where it happens, maybe we tell them, hey, if you pick up these 3, then the other 2 are going to cost you $50 a day. But if you would have picked up the wrong ones, they cost you $400 a day. And so there is a little bit of optimization and method to the madness for not just like, we want to avoid it at all times, which is the ideal goal, right? But sometimes it's smarter to incur $50 here and there than it is to, I need to bobtail a container. So bobtail is, I need to send a trucker with nothing one way to pick up a container and deliver it because that's a bunch of empty miles. So maybe there's a better way to maybe pay $50 to leave it at the port one day in order to ensure there's no empty miles.
Is there any part of the shipment process, because it feels like, over the last handful of years that we have found a way to make data points of every part of the logistics process. But I'm curious if there's any aspect of the shipment journey from source to port that will never have full visibility or would be really challenging to get that full visibility.
The hardest part and the thing that we do our best to solve is connecting the dots between what is inside the container and what the container is itself. And so you're bringing up the example of like getting it all the way to like the customer's door. Like if, I order a t-shirt, right? Or I order master's tickets or whatever. We talked about the masters earlier. If I order something to my door, a t-shirt example works better for this one. If it came in a container from Asia to the US, I can track everything by that container. I know what container it's in. And so therefore I track the container. But then when it gets to a distribution center and it gets unloaded, there's a separate database and a separate tracking identifier and all these things that is important to track it from the time it's at the distribution center, maybe to a store or maybe to another distribution center. And then it gets picked up by United States Postal Service or FedEx or whatever it is to be delivered to my house. And so the hardest part of putting all of these things together is knowing how to organize this database with this one in order to connect them all and give you that full, like it was at the factory and then it went here and then it went here and then it went to this, just all the way to the end. We're getting there. We do that for a lot of our customers, but it is difficult to understand and index and do all the different database VLOOKUPs, right? I mean, think of Excel. It's a bunch of VLOOKUPs from this one to this one to this one to get that full end-to-end picture.
Is there any kind of effort within the industry just as a whole? Maybe you guys are trying to do this, but any kind of like data standardization, across the globe or across maybe just the United States, like starting very small, maybe moving outwards. Is there any kind of issues or not issues, but efforts being made in that regard?
There are, and I think, I mentioned how everybody has their own systems earlier. Everybody has their own data model, their own way of doing things. So if there was standardization in the industry that everybody adhered to, that would be easier. And I think there are efforts being made. The DCSA, the Digital Container Shipping Association, has done a good job of working with the ocean carriers themselves of, hey, if we get all the ocean carriers to follow this data model and their APIs and their data exchange that they're participating in, then it makes it easier for both individual shippers, software companies like us, freight forwarders, and so on to digest that data and do things with it. And they're doing great work, and I'm excited. I know the guys there, and I've talked with them a bunch, and hope to continue to give feedback and help them. But for us, we kind of take that data model and take what we get from all these places and mold it to what we think our customer cares about. So I mentioned, like, we show our customers the things that are important. So we maybe, and the example that we always talk about is if a container is going to California and then it's getting on a rail and going to Chicago, we're not going to give you like the last free day and all this stuff in California, because that doesn't matter to our customer. What they care about is, when is it going to get to Chicago? And then whenever it's in Chicago, when can I pick it up? When's the last, like, how am I going to get charged for things? And so there's all this business logic that we put around the data points that we get from all these people to show our customers what they really care about. And so it's, I mentioned how we were pretty naive, and then we've gained more and more experience and iterated over time to where we add new data points and subtract and change the data model over time, because we're getting that continuous feedback from our customers on what they really care about and how they're going to use it.
Are you able to, with your customers, I imagine that you're collecting a lot of their data as well. Is there any kind of sort of a global spreadsheet that you're looking at with everybody's data that you can kind of notice trends that are happening maybe before your customers do?
Definitely. And the cool thing that our engineers, again, not me, I'm the dumb guy over there, but the engineers that have figured this out, it's super smart for taking, there's everybody's supply chain is different, right? So if you just throw every single container in a giant spreadsheet and be like, I want to make predictions, it works, but there's a part of it that's unique to every person. So and the example I always use is trying to predict someone who moves 5 containers a year because they ship them directly to their store. It's like a small furniture company, and they do something like that. Trying to use their data to predict how Amazon's containers are going to flow doesn't exactly match, because Amazon that does all these containers might have a totally different priority, where they may they have better contracts. They leave containers at the port for longer. They keep them away from the port for longer. And so their supply chain works differently. So what our engineers have done is we have like a ubiquitous data model for everything. It's like every container that flows from Shanghai to Los Angeles is on these big vessels, and we know the route that it's taking and the stops that the vessel's making along the way. So we can make predictions for, say 80% of it. And then the last 20% is at the customer level. So that person that moves 5 containers, as soon as we get some of their containers in our system and we understand how long they usually leave it at the port and how long they're keeping it away and how their supply chain works, you can kind of take both models and add them together to get something that makes sense for them.
That almost sounds very similar to, what's going on with like the large language models, where they're probably going to reach a certain level of parity soon. And they have they're all pulling in their certain amount of data, but then what's really going to push it over the edge for the end user is using your own data in addition to that level of parity. I doubt we've reached a level of parity when it comes to logistics data, but that's what it kind of sounds like.
Right. Yeah. I mean, giving it context, right, is like the large language models that we're all used to was trained on so much, YouTube data and publicly available information on the internet and so much text and languages and all those kind of things. Right. And so in order to make it super intelligent about, say, Gnosis Freight, we give it, hey, read our website or look at our API documentation and do those things. And then the second you give it more of that context, it gets better. It's the same idea for what we do with our customers, where if we, tell it, the large language model that we have in Gnosis is equivalent to like tracking every container from port to port or port to rail or whatever it is, right? And then the stuff that happens where it's delivering to a distribution and something is the context that it needs to make those predictions outside of the normal model.
Speaking from like a global scale, how, with all the data that you guys have access to, how does the U.S. compare from, port efficiency versus the rest of the world? Are we doing okay? Are we doing not as good? What does that comparison level look like?
I'll speak to some positives. I'll say from a positive perspective there, and people ask me like, what's my favorite port and all those kind of things. I think there's some big strides being made at some places in the U.S. I think the Port of Virginia is a great example. They do a great job embracing some new technology and talking with technology companies and doing things, and their efficiency and all these kind of things. It shows, there's the global like port efficiency rankings and things. There's like 353 ports in the world or something like that. And some of our larger ports in the US are at the very bottom. And then you look at Port of Virginia and they're like, not at the top 10 or top 20, but pretty far up there and they're continuing to gain strides in that because they're embracing technology and doing some cool things. I don't want to speak to any of the negatives. There's a lot of the regulatory stuff and all that comes with why maybe we're not at some certain places in the U.S. But overall, there's some people that are doing some great things, and I hope it continues.
Yeah, I think I was listening to your interview with Mike Lombard with his show.
Yeah.
Yes, it was a great interview with him. And you were telling a story about how you went to Spain and you hiked up to the top of this mountain and then you looked over at the port and it was almost a little eerie because there was nobody working and It was all automated.
My wife loved that. We were in Spain and I found a way to incorporate containers and was like, oh my God, that's APM Barcelona. There's blah, blah, blah. Look at how
great.
We had like done this cute hike and I topped it off with like, oh, look at that terminal. Yeah. So yeah, but I mean, it is. And that's I think there's a lot of opportunity for improving that. And the whole idea that people talk about around AI and automation and things is, like I said about Gnosis, the goal is not to replace people's jobs, right? And I know that that's the fear and a lot of these things. That's never the goal. The goal is to replace the stuff that people don't really want to do, right? It's the monotonous, like moving a container from, spot A to spot D or doing things like that. That's where I feel like we can take advantage of AI and automation and those kind of things so that they can do more creative work and do cooler things and make decisions and do right. That's I feel like the goal. And I think that for all the things that the US is good at, I think that's one that we're a little bit behind.
Yeah, I would agree because I've had conversations with people who work at ports, all across the globe. And it's one of those things where you have to balance the technology with the human element. And even though it's really cool to see like a fully automated port, that's there's a lot of job loss there too. And, how do you balance what that looks like? And I definitely see the efficiency gains. But I do wonder how we can still keep the human involved at that high level, like you were talking about. And so I think there's definitely a balance to strike. And I don't know that the US has sort of reached that balance, but I would probably counter that own point with each port kind of has their own decision to make in that regard. So I think that's a little bit cooler of a feature for US based ports is that they can choose their destiny. They can choose to embrace jobs or technology and maybe a little bit of both.
That's right. And I'll, make the parallel of whenever the Gnosis example is we come in, our goal is to help people not have to go check 100 different websites to understand what's going on with their containers. The idea is then not to fire that person, but it's to let them think about what's next. Like, maybe the fact that they didn't have to spend 4 hours figuring out where all their stuff was, that means they can call their customer and ask how they could do more. It's like, hey, like all your stuff's ready, but I saw that you're struggling in Vietnam and we have this supplier. We know that there's all kinds of different things that could just be, it's better suited for their time. They could bring more value to the business than them just doing the monotonous work of day to day. Where is this and putting it into their system?
Now, we talked a little bit about the Spain story. Do you have any other stories that you've kind of learned from being involved in the data so heavily for, a handful of years now? You mentioned Vietnam just now. Is there anything kind of surprising that stands out to you data-wise from just global trade in general?
I mean, just at a holistic level, it continues to surprise me every day that like the imposter syndrome I talked about is like, there really isn't like some behind the scenes, like all seeing data source that we just don't have access to and they're not telling us about. And I'll say that from the perspective of, it's not like the big bad ocean carrier has a bunch of data that we don't, and therefore they're charging us money, and they're just taking advantage of people. It's really that the data just doesn't exist. There's not like some place that's figured it all out, and then they're just hiding it from everybody because they want to make money off of it. It's just that everybody's kind of in this together. And I mean, it's talking to all different parties. And, we work at Gnosis, we work with the ocean carriers, we work with the terminals and ports themselves. We talk to the rail carriers, we talk to the shippers, the drayage carriers, the freight forwarders. We've talked to every single person that's somewhere along the way, and they all kind of have similar questions. And it's all asking about, where does this data point come from? How can we do this better? It's different data points because, everybody relies on somebody else to get certain ones, but no one has a perfect answer. There's not like some place that has it behind the scenes that we wish we could all grab it. They're all trying to coordinate together and figure it out, which has been super cool for us to start to gain a little confidence when we're talking to the ocean carriers or talking to the ports or talking to shippers and people. Is like, we've talked to everybody, we feel like, and we keep improving our data model based on all the different people that are telling us about it.
Within the models, does it exist to sort of omit some of these black swan events? Like, is that a maybe a thing? Like, I would imagine, like, removing Amazon from your data set, obviously you're going to see some different fluctuations in that regard. You're going to remove a lot of shipments from that regard. But I'm almost curious if it's more valuable to remove some of the bigger players or the bigger black swan events in order to make that data a little bit more actionable for customers, or do they find it's better to look at it from more of a holistic view?
I think, in order to make predictions and do things, we're eliminating the outliers all the time. In order to get to that like best estimation, we're taking stuff out and making predictions based on whatever we have best available. Was talking to somebody yesterday, and we were talking about, hey, this ETA was pushed back by 40 days. Why was Gnosis wrong? And I have this conversation, and I am sitting there, and we're looking at it, and it's like, man, we made this ETA prediction because we thought it was going to follow this path, right? And then we go dig into the data, and the container had gotten unloaded in Panama at a terminal, and it was supposed to, get on another ship like 3 days later, but it didn't, and it just sat in Panama for 40 days or whatever it was. And so that, like, there's these things that happen where it's just operational, where I don't know, and there's maybe a way we could have predicted that it would have been delayed a little bit, but there's no way for us to there's all these like outlier things that happen. There's no way to really predict that it would have just sat there for 40 days. It's just like an operational thing. Maybe they just forgot about it, right? It's like there's stuff that happens that if you try to predict everything, then you'll predict nothing, right? And so trying to get the good data model that I can talk to our customers and say, hey, we can tell you with 95% certainty that it's going to get there by this date. That's hopefully good enough. And then we continue to try to get that better and better all the time. But then in the situation that it happens, all we did is we made it red at the top. We're like, hey, something's happening here. And that's where they started to drill into it. And they go to their provider and say, what's happening? Why did you leave my container at a transshipment terminal for 40 days?
Yeah, I imagine it probably falls into some of those examples like you were talking about earlier, where you want to manage the exceptions instead of the rule of the, I would imagine that most shipments are error-free or hassle-free. Is that a safe assumption? Is the majority of our shipments hassle-free?
Yeah, and especially now, that like there's the craziness that happened with the Suez Canal, the stuff that happened in the Panama Canal with droughts, and then go back to COVID whenever ships were hanging outside LA for a month or longer. That stuff kind of has subsided a little bit. I know that the Suez Canal still is an issue, but the ships that are going around the Cape and they have their normal transit times and stuff, there's not a whole lot of craziness happening, right? And so in that case, you can get to, we have this ETA prediction, and maybe there's a day that slips here or there based on how long it stays at any individual terminal or stop along the way. But for the most part, things are working pretty well.
What about, this is going to be a completely random comment. What about like piracy? Is that still, obviously, there's things going on. There's issues going on within the Suez Canal. Somali pirates were one of those things that you heard about for a long time. You don't really hear a lot about them anymore. But what about finding those kinds of outliers? I was watching a YouTube video last night. It made me think of this. But like all the pirates of the 1700s, 1800s that were in the Caribbean, and does piracy still exist in sort of modern ocean shipping?
I'm sure it does. I'm sure that there are instances of piracy. I think going around the Cape of Good Hope, that was one of the concerns, is that there would be more of the piracy and things that happen down there. I'll say the thing that we've seen more is theft on the domestic level. So containers in rail yards, either in LA, Long Beach, or somewhere between LA and Memphis or Chicago, getting broken into. That we've had a lot more questions about than the piracy on the ocean side, which is interesting. Yeah. So, and people ask us about that, how can you help us prevent it? How can you help us know when this happens? And it's a super interesting conversation to have, to understand. And people are telling us, it's, X% of their shipments get broken into when it's sitting in a rail yard. It's crazy. Yeah.
And so how are you advising them to sort of get around that? Just, move their shipments from, these, I guess, high crime areas?
We collect all the data of when it happens, and we give them the insight to, hey, well, whenever you move it on X route between these two places with this carrier, whatever it is, it seems like it's more likely to be broken into. And then, there's, I don't know, short of us putting a security guard out there, I'm not sure I don't know what else we could do. Right. So we're continuously evaluating that. That's always a super interesting conversation to have.
Yeah, I've had conversations, with the, insurance folks who provide insurance to, the industry, and they have software that just tracks those high crime areas, tries to, help them avoid it, and geofencing, and there's all kinds of technology that's, come into logistics that is really fascinating with some of these problems that they're trying to solve. And I guess in that similar vein, where do you see, with this tech adoption going? It feels like all companies now know the importance of technology, adopting, evolving, using, AI, machine learning, however you want to phrase it. Where do you see things evolving in, I don't want to say 5 years, I feel like that's impossible to determine, but maybe the next couple of years?
Sure. And I'll double down on what I was kind of saying at the beginning. And I know we've talked a ton about data and ETAs and predictions and those kind of things. And Gnosis does that. I feel like we feel like we're the best at it. We do it a whole lot. But the stuff that gets us super excited, the stuff that our customers get really excited about, is all the execution stuff that's in parallel to that. So if you get the data right, then you can start to do the cool things. And like a couple of examples is like the financial piece. So auditing invoices, making sure that you're getting charged the ocean freight rate that you should, the drayage rate that you should, the contracts that you've agreed on. That if we have all the data, then what are the things that you can do with that data? You can make sure that everything else matches, right? Mm-hmm. So the auditing piece, the actual execution of, I mentioned, like, if you figure out something is in danger, to send an email to somebody, well, that's something we can automate, right? It's like to make sure that every container that is coming in has somebody that's responsible for it, to send a delivery order, right, to a drayage carrier or so on. We've built, and we continue to build the tools to allow people to do their job in Gnosis, instead of just using it as like a business intelligence tool, like, where's my stuff? But actually, okay, I know where all my stuff is, and I know I have to do these things, but I can get Gnosis to help me do those things.
Yeah, that's another soundbite that we'll probably use in a future clip, to promote this episode. Last couple questions here, and this is just a curiosity one, because I live in Jacksonville, very close range to Savannah's port. We have Jacksport here, of course. There's a little rivalry between Jacksport and Savannah, and I was curious of, is that a similar feeling on the Charleston side of things, that there's a little rivalry with Savannah?
Yeah, of course. I think so. Savannah has been crushing it the past couple of years. They're a lot bigger than Charleston and Jacksonville, and they've been doing a great job. We have relationships in both places, and kind of, they're so I'll speak to the port piece. There's definitely the city rivalry. We think Charleston's way better than Savannah, and we'll argue that they're our little brother, little sister, whatever, all the time. But anyway, on the port side, I think that the port leadership works super well together. And although they have like slightly different philosophies, and there is a little bit of that rivalry, they do a great job of coordinating and talking with each other and sharing strategy and those kind of things. Good example is, that was funny. whenever all the congestion hit and COVID and Savannah got super backed up, a lot of people diverted and went to Charleston. Well, the problem was everybody decided to divert and go to Charleston. So there was like we have a chart that was like, delays in Savannah, delays in Charleston, and it like crossed. And it was like delays in Charleston went up and delays in Savannah went down because they did such a good job of coordinating that everybody switched. And then it just happened here.
Well, I think that's we're going to bring this episode full circle because we started off by talking about Southern Charm. The Charleston series is still going on. The Savannah one, however, it only lasted a couple of seasons, maybe even one season. So I think we have another comparison there too: the city, the port, and editions of Southern Charm. So, Jake, this was a really fun conversation. Anything that you feel is important to mention that we haven't already talked about?
I think whenever I talk on a podcast or anything, I'm always super self-conscious that I give credit to the employees at Gnosis. I think that, I mentioned a couple of times on this podcast, so like, hey, I'm the dumb guy, but I really mean it that we are super unique in a software company where everybody that works at Gnosis is in this building. And so like I'm in my office right now and everybody that works here is right outside. So they're in their offices and they all, cubicles and all those kind of things. The people that work here come to the office every day. They open their laptop and they're solving engineering problems for our customers. And they're doing that on a global scale, from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern time, but then also answering emails at 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. for all of our customers that are all over the world. So I'd be remiss if I didn't take a chance to thank them and just like give a shout out to the guys that work here, that they're all doing a really incredible job.
That's super interesting to hear because a lot of folks are, like, oh, we want, hybrid, we want work from home. But I mean, obviously you guys are doing some great things with an employee base that's all in house. Austin and myself really have doubled down on that since the beginning of it's definitely hurts us sometimes where we can't hire some of the talent we want that maybe lives in San Francisco or New York or wherever it is. But there's a siren going by outside right now. Sorry. But dropping too many facts.
But we think that it hurts sometimes in the short term, but in the long term, we feel very strongly in the culture and everybody being here and being able to collaborate. And those things has given us a huge advantage when we've been building products and making changes and doing things.
That's awesome to hear. Yeah, it's definitely, you don't hear that perspective often now, but I think, a little bit of the tide is turning for a lot of these companies that are requiring folks to come back into the office, that there is some synergy, there is some, brainstorming that you can take advantage of if you're working together as a unit versus kind of feeling like you're working in your own individual silo, which is, has its own challenges.
And I think it kind of happened where like COVID, like going remote and doing those things, we went, remote whenever everything first happened. And at that time, it was probably 7 of us that were working at Gnosis at the time, like 2020, when it was really, really bad. And then we looked up one day and we had all like been in the same pod and we were like eating lunch at someone's house. And Austin called me. He was like, "Are you kidding me? You guys are all together." And we like went remote so that nobody would be together and like cause like spread anything. So we were like, oh, well, we're all like together all the time anyway. We might as well just keep working together. So it was a weird like realization that we were small enough at the time and we were all hanging out anyway that, man, we could have just been doing this the whole time.
Right. Exactly. And I think that's the mindset that a lot of companies took is, they would rather, be with their people and be within the group that they're always around anyway. So why not, get some work done and, make some money at the same time.
Exactly.
All right, cool. Well, Jake, this was awesome conversation. Where can I send folks who want to learn more, who want to, upgrade their visibility options, connect with you on LinkedIn?
Yes.
Where can I send them?
Yeah, LinkedIn. Of course, I'm always on LinkedIn and posting dumb things on there all the time. Following Reed Lucillo's example to try to post stuff on there all the time. LinkedIn, gnosisfreight.com, our website. I think we have a form that you can go and fill out there and somebody will be in touch with you. But anybody can reach out to me directly. My title is CTO and that's like a technical title, but I do a whole lot of sales and talking to customers. And I just love nerding out on all this stuff. So I'm happy to talk to anybody.
Awesome. Well, we will make sure to put all of that in the show notes to make it easy for folks. But again, thank you for the conversation and the insight. This was a fun one.
Thanks, Blythe.